Well met, everyone. It's good to be back. I started talking in the last video about the inn in the first book, in Aerworld Book 1, about the inn the Badger's Sett, and I read a little bit of the chapter that talks about that, where John is talking to Elfgar and Ottersfoot the ferret is there, and it sets a bit of a scene for that place, what it once was before the darkness came to the Realm of Lorroth, and all those troubles came, the Beast Army, the Dark Army, all that kerfuffle, and it spoke a little bit about what what the Badger's Sett was like before all that happened, and the changes now, and how it was a bit more like a hospital almost, where there were wounded soldiers, refugees fleeing the conflict coming through, all that sort of thing. And Elfgar, that ranger hunter character who would regularly pop in to the inn and drop off game for John, the landlord, he was commenting that, well, John and Elfgar were discussing the fact that John needed the poultices and medicines that Elfgar was able to produce as much as he needed the game for food now, because there were less patrons coming into the pub to eat and drink, and more people coming through that he needed help. And then they set off on a journey together, and that's sort of where we left it, because this series is really primarily about the pubs and the inns of that realm, Lorroth, and then a bit later on we'll dip into the pub that's from the village Bishopsbury, which is in the latest book, overlooking the sea. We'll dip into that one. But today we're into Book 2, Aerworld, Book 2, Dark Forests and Treacherous Seas, which came out the year after the first book. And I just wanted to read a little bit from this one. It's chapter 1, in fact, so you dive straight back in to the Badger's Sett in chapter 1. Things are getting back to normal in the realm, but there's always something going on. And so, yeah, let's just dive straight into this chapter 1. And it's called Pheasant, Rabbit and Deer. The flames crackled and spat, dying as the last of the glowing logs slowly gave itself up to ash. A few regulars sat talking and laughing at a table close to the bar as John the innkeeper wandered over and jabbed the remains of the fire in the great hearth that was the centre of the Badger's Sett. The brickwork of the hearth had absorbed a lot of the heat of the fire that had burned for most of the day, and the warmth it gave from the reddish embers was a comfort to the old soldier. He paused for a moment and stared thoughtfully at the diminishing flames. The rich aroma of game stew drifted up from the pot that bubbled away above what was left of the fire, and even at this late hour it still smelled good. But it was well past midnight now, and John was getting tired. Maybe, he mused, he should have taken up a different line of work when he retired from the army of Lorroth, but that was a few years ago now, and it was too late to change. Besides, he loved meeting such a diversity of folk as frequented his tavern, and he liked the odd bit of excitement that was in this line of work. Grinning, he glanced over towards the bar and looked at his great axe, which still hung up on the wall there. He pondered on the times he'd needed that weapon since he hung it there to begin its own retirement, and smiled. There's a couple of occasions in the last book where he does need to use that axe, and he and Elfgar get into it with a few unsavouries. But for now all seems peaceful. So he looked up at the great axe and smiled. A shout from the group brought his attention back to the present, and he smiled and nodded to the man who held his cup up high to be refilled. Prodding the fire one last time and throwing on a couple more logs, the burly innkeeper rose warily to his feet and told himself that he wouldn't be getting to bed just yet. He filled a jug with ale and took it over to the table, thanking the man for the coin in exchange. Back at the bar, John leaned over for a cloth and began wiping up some spilt ale and collecting up a few empty bowls that had been left over after a meal. Suddenly, John felt tiny sharp claws pawing at his leg. He looked down to see a cheeky-looking ferret chattering excitedly up at him. With a smile, John bent down and scooped the creature up and gave him a stroke. "Ottersfoot, you little scamp, where did you appear from?" John stopped tickling the ferret for a moment and glanced around the room. "And where is your master? I'm damn sure I didn't see either of you come in." The answer to John's question was found in a dark corner of the inn, in the form of a figure sat at a table wearing worn leather armour and wrapped in a thick woolen cloak. The cloak still showed traces of the snow that fell heavily outside. Even though the warmth from the fire reached all of the room, Elfgar had not been there for long. That's the way they always have to be introduced, isn't it? Worn leather armour and a thick cloak to keep out the winter weather. John strode happily over to the table, pausing for a moment as he saw the half a dozen freshly killed rabbits that had been set down on the end of the bar. "Where did you come from? I didn't notice the door open this past hour." Elfgar grinned. "You're losing your edge, old friend. You need something to remind you, methinks." John shook his head. "Oh no, not me. That last little adventure of ours nearly got us both killed." He stopped himself midway. He couldn't convince himself he meant what he said, so there was no hope of getting away with convincing the ranger. John did need something to remind him, and he hoped it would be soon. Ottersfoot leapt off the innkeeper's shoulder onto the table by his master, then jumped again onto the floor and scampered off after a mouse he was convinced he had seen. John and Elfgar watched him go as he raced over towards the laughing drinkers, and the pair studied the group for a few moments. "I don't recognise some of them, John. That's Grigg the moneylender from Othsmouth, and a couple of his kin. But what about the foreigners?" Elfgar was suspicious of people at the best of times, and doubly so of folk he didn't recognise. You know, it's the climate that this book is coming into. The realm has just been through an awful war, and people are still very suspicious of one another. And, you know, that's always the way in these little hamlets and villages, isn't it? The road that this inn is on is the Deldown Road, which goes through to Othsmouth, which is a major trading centre on the coast. So they get a lot of traffic through there, and they're not always people that they know. But, you know, in the current climate, that's even more pronounced. And of course, Elfgar is quite a solitary fellow anyway. He's a ranger of the wilds. He's off hunting and, you know, off into the woods for weeks on end. And, you know, he'll admit that he prefers the company of Ottersfoot over the company of men. So it's probably a tricky situation for him to be in. So yeah, it tells us he's suspicious. His profession saw him travelling a lot, and although he did his best to avoid contact with humans, necessity meant that he needed to trade meat and pelts with them, and so he often visited Deldown and Othsmouth. He knew the regular faces, and he saw enough of the new folk coming off the ship's dock there to learn the ones who could be trusted and the ones who could not. It wasn't his habit to go looking for trouble, but John was the only friend he had, or wanted, amongst the world of humans, and he liked to keep an eye on the inn. And so it carries on, and we might dive into that in the next one, because we're about to get into a bit of a situation which is developing with some of these characters by the bar. You know, he's already alluded to the moneylender that's there with some of his less than reputable companions, Grigg the moneylender, and so you kind of get a feel that something's about to kick off. So yeah, we're diving. You know, that's book 2, diving straight back into the inn, and it sort of sets the tone for the book, really. And I try and keep that vein running through in all 3 of the books, Aerworld 1 and 2, and Overlooking the Sea, which kind of runs alongside them. That kind of theme of nature and that sort of the smoky inn with the game stew bubbling on the fire and all that good stuff. You know, a nice flagon of ale to tap into. So yeah. You know, I hope that gives you a bit of a taste for the books. You can, as I always say, you can read them for free on the website, overlookingthesea.com, if you would like to. They are all in paperback. Overlooking the Sea is being released on the 30th of November this year, 2025. they're self-published, so there were short runs of the paperbacks back in the day. I think book 1 was 2010. This one, book 2, was 2011, and they were reasonably short runs, so they're actually quite hard to get hold of now in paperback. But if you look at the PDFs and you like what you see, buzz me over a message through the website. There's a contact thing on the Read the Books page, and we can, I can sort out paperback copies for people if they wanted them. But anyway, yeah, just another little delve into the realm, and a nice little bit of time in a nice old country pub. So thanks for watching, and I wish you all the very best of days. Bye bye for now.